Thank you very much for that very kind and surprising introduction. My name is Marieke van Vugt, and my mission is to change the world through finding out what the effects are of changing our minds. And I do that through science. And then, as I will show you today, we often have to go down to some very maybe impoverished models of the world. We stick people in a lab with very awkward tasks, but that is the only way in which we can really make strong conclusions and learn something and slowly build up our way to the complexity of the real world. So actually compassion, although it is really a strong motivation that's driving my scientific work, I actually don't really study it very much explicitly and directly, but today I'll make some speculations about how compassion is actually influencing my work and how my work might say something about compassion. Good, so just to start with the takeaway, so you guys already, in case you zone out, you know what I want to say. I want to say that compassion changes the way we feel. It makes us, I would argue, feel better, and there's some scientific evidence for that. Compassion can be trained through mindfulness, and mindfulness helps to make our minds more clear and more flexible, and that's what I would argue you need to be compassionate. So I will unpack that in the next few minutes. And here you can see a picture. It's a picture of a Buddha of compassion who has a lot of hands, 1,000 hands. And I think it's a beautiful picture of compassion because it shows compassion is not just some fuzzy state, but it's really, as Marilyn also said, it's about doing something. And if you really want to do something, you need a lot of hands. So that's what this Buddha represents. And well, I think it's just a beautiful picture to show the concept. So, to get started, what is compassion? Well, Marilyn just said that there might be lots of definitions. This is the definition I came across in science, and some of the most influential researchers studying compassion are Olga Klimek and Tanya Zinger, and they wrote just recently a very nice review paper in which they said, compassion is characterized by feelings of warmth, concern and care for the other, as well as a strong motivation to improve the other's well-being. So this shows that it's both a feeling state as well as a very active thing that you do. And I've shown you some examples of people who I think are very beautiful examples of compassion. So on the on the right, you can see Matthieu Ricard, who some of you might know. He's a Westerner who spent many years in the Himalayas. He became a Buddhist monk, and it really shows you this fuzzy aspect of compassion. He's just, also when you see him, he's just looks really sweet, and here he's even cuddling with a little animal, so that's one part of it. But it's not just about being sweet and cuddly, and actually, we also heard about that this morning. It's also something that has to be very powerful, because if you want to change, you really have to have a lot of power. And so on the left, you can see Roshi Joan Halifax. She is a Zen teacher, and she has an amazing TED Talk, whom I highly recommend you watching, in which she shows more of the fierce aspect of compassion. It's also something very powerful, and that's what you need. That's maybe what's meant by the strong motivation to improve others' well-being. It's a really big driving force. So that is by way of scientific definition of how it's what it's considered to be by scientists. Now, what does it look like in the brain? So this is from that same paper. Here is a picture that illustrates brains with blue and red lobes. And the blue and red lobes are empathy and compassion. Now, of course, I don't really believe that there's just one spot in the brain that does empathy and one other spot that does compassion. In fact, you already see that there are different lobes, and even those might change depending on the context and circumstances. But what's important to take away from this is that your brain does something different when you're engaging in empathy from what you're doing when you're engaging in compassion. So the set of brain areas that you could say lights up when people practice compassion, that might get changed after people train in compassion, that is a set of brain areas that might have something to do with reward. So there's the ventral striatum that you see in the total right side picture, and the nucleus accumbens. And actually those are areas that normally also get activated when we taste something pleasant, when we feel happy, those kind of areas. You can also see anterior cingulate, which is involved in all kinds of cognitive control. So those are some areas that get activated when we practice compassion. When we practice empathy, which means something like feeling along with the other's feeling, you can actually see that areas like the insula get activated, and the insula has been associated with many different things, but amongst others, it's also feeling the feelings of others, and that means that if you see someone suffering, you start to activate your own pain matrix, the network of your brain that sort of turns on when you feel pain yourself, that gets activated when you feel others' pain as well. So you can imagine that that's actually fairly exhausting, and maybe you don't even feel the power to do anything for the other person because you're totally swept away by their pain. So this is, I think, a very nice way to illustrate that compassion and empathy are quite different things, and the science is starting to really dissociate those, both in the brain as well as in behavior. And the important thing here in terms of these brain areas is that while compassion activates areas related to positive affect, it also results in more pro-social behavior. It also actually cultivates well-being. Because you can see it activates these reward areas, and also if you ask people how do you feel after a compassion training, they report feeling better, feeling healthier, and things like that. Whereas with empathy, actually, it sometimes is the opposite. They, especially when you show people pictures of or films of people that suffer, they actually start to feel worse, and they start to sometimes get health concerns and things like that. So there's quite a different effect of those emotions on people. So the next question is, well, if compassion is such a nice thing that generates well-being, how can we cultivate it? So here you can see on the left a picture of me practicing in a room. This was actually at the Mind and Life Institute in Amherst, Massachusetts, where I was fortunate enough to spend about 6 weeks as a visiting scholar, studying mindfulness and trying to come up with scientific ways to explain it and develop theories of it. And the point is that I want to make is that one way to cultivate compassion is to practice mindfulness. And now, as it turns out, mindfulness is one of the things I study as a scientist. So, is there evidence for that mindfulness cultivates compassion? Yes, there is. There was a very nice study by a researcher called Paul Condon of Northeastern University in Boston. And he showed that actually when you give people an 8-week compassion intervention, and then after the fact, you put them in, they did a very funny, clever experiment. They had them come in for an experiment, and so before the experiment, they were sat down in a waiting room, and there were, the waiting room was full of people, and there was one chair left, so they would sit down in it, and the other person came in on crutches. And they looked actually at what the person who came, what the study subject would do. Would they actually give up their chair for the person on crutches or not? And they actually showed that after a mindfulness intervention that did not say any word about compassion, people gave up their chair more frequently than the control group that did not receive that mindfulness intervention. And yeah, let's look at some studies. So I would argue that mindfulness increases mental clarity, and this is the first study I did on mindfulness, or in meditation actually in general. It was a study at Shambhala Mountain Center, so in the picture you can see a big stupa. It's in Colorado. It was a lot of fun to go there and test meditators that went on a retreat. So there are 29 experienced meditators who really voluntarily went to spend a month there to observe their own minds essentially for 8 hours or 10 hours a day. And we came at the beginning and at the end of that month, and we tested them in one of our awkward lab tasks, as I already previewed in the beginning. So people saw a sequence of face stimuli, like you see in the picture, so 3 faces shown one after the other. Then there was a couple seconds break, and then they saw another face. And of that last face, they had to say whether it was one of the faces that I just shown you. So as you can see, the faces are very, very similar to one another. And that is on purpose, because I really wanted to see how much in detail people could remember these faces. And that says something about the clarity of your own mind. How much can you actually hold in your mind? Basically, so when we then, had people do this for quite a while, about half an hour, again and again, and we measured how quickly they did that and how accurately they did that. We then did some computational modeling. So, as Salman said, I'm working at the Department of Artificial Intelligence, so I like to make computer models of things, and that's what I did here. And the computer model really allowed me to find out what was the crucial cognitive mechanism that had changed over the month that these people were meditating. And what I found was what you see in the right graph. On the right graph you see, doesn't really work, the pointer. On the right graph you can see in dark gray the meditators and in light gray the controls, and on the y-axis it's basically some measure of the quality of the perceptual evidence that they see, and it's graphing the difference between the end and the beginning. So you can see that in the dark gray bar, the meditators actually increased in their the clarity of the evidence on which they were deciding, whereas the controls, if anything, decreased. So this showed some evidence for an increase in the clarity of remembered information. And, well, the other thing that I said is changed by mindfulness is a sense of mental flexibility. So this is a study in which we asked people who were engaging in a mindfulness-based cognitive therapy intervention. We asked them to remember or memorize lists of positive, negative, and neutral words. So it'd be something like you get a list of words in the study phase and you try to really memorize them, and for every word we also asked them how pleasant is this word, how arousing is this word. Then there were a 15-minute break with other tasks and stuff, and then we asked them, so now tell me the words that you were supposed to memorize in any particular order. What they did not know is that we were actually really interested in what order they recalled these words. The trick is that this says something about how you associate from one word to the next. And what we then looked at was, once you were recalling some positive words, what is the probability that you continue recalling some more positive words? So what is the tendency to just get stuck in positive words, and what is the tendency to get stuck in negative words? So on the left we see positive words, on the right we see negative. The green is the mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and the yellow is controls. And on the left, the left is mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and right is controls. And the green is the first time we tested, and the yellow is the second time we tested after the intervention. Well, this is a lot of data, but basically, the end of the story is that after the mindfulness intervention, these depressed people, these were all depressed people, were more likely to continue recalling something positive once they were recalling something positive, so they were better able to stay with positive information, which is quite something for depressed people. And they were actually less likely to continue recalling something negative when they were recalling something negative. So they were less stuck in the negative. So this gave this, I would say, these depressed people were therefore less stuck in recalling negative things, and it increased their mental flexibility. Now, the last study I did was not with depressed people, and it's actually not even with mindfulness, but it's something that's trying to relate the mental flexibility back to cognition. So why is it even beneficial to be mentally flexible? Why do we need that? And this is a study with students in which I asked them to memorize letters, but in between every letter that they had to memorize, we asked them to make judgments about words. And the words were something like kind, judgmental, devious, whatever, all kinds of personality attributes. And when we asked them for these personality attributes, like, does that describe you, yes or no? We actually found that they were less able to memorize the letters than when we just asked them, okay, does the word contain an A, or does it fit in a shoebox, or something like that. So actually, what we think is going on here is that as you are more worried about yourself, as you get stuck in these cycles of thinking about yourself, you actually have less working memory capacity, less planning capacity available to deal with the world and also to help others. So we're exploring further whether this might be affected by mindfulness practice and whether certain types of training can reduce our tendency to get stuck in this, but I think this is an important point. So that's basically the end of my story. I hope I'll have shown you how compassion is associated with well-being and also has a very specific effect on brain activity, and we're still sorting out, how that gets trained and how it differs between different types of compassion training and different people, but we're starting to move along. Then I showed you how one way to train compassion is mindfulness. And I showed you how mindfulness helps us to take charge of our mind by increasing our mental clarity and improving our mental flexibility. There are, of course, many more effects, but those are some of the studies I've done. So it's a good start. That's the end of my story. If there are any questions, let me know.
Are there any questions? Yeah, there's a question right back there. There's a microphone coming towards you.
First of all, thank you for your talk. I was wondering if you can maybe go a few slides back to your first study that you described, like one slide further. The other way. Here you described that there was an increase in mental clarity for people who study mindfulness, but also on the left side, I'm not sure if I see it correctly, but it seems as if people who, compared to controls, that the people who are practicing mindfulness have initially less clarity of mind.
No, so thank you for drawing your drawing attention to that graph, so I probably should have just shown you the right one. So the graph on the left on the right is about mental clarity, but the graph on the left is about sort of how much information or evidence do I need to collect before I make a decision. So it's a very different cognitive process, and we found that actually meditators needed to collect less evidence, which makes a lot of sense if the evidence itself that you make your decisions on is clearer. So that's what that is about.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for your questions. One question here. There's two questions here at the front. Not sure if they had made an appointment with each other, but here, there, that one, yeah, that one.
I just want to ask how you see, you're talking about empathy and compassion, and that they are different concepts, I agree. But I'm asking myself, do you mean that compassion doesn't need empathy? Because for me, without empathy, we don't have compassion.
Yeah, I would say that you probably need a little bit of empathy to understand what the other person is going through, but it shouldn't be sort of too extensive, because then there's the danger of becoming swept away by what the other person is feeling. So it's probably helpful, but you only need it in the beginning to a limited extent.
But if you're compassionate, then it should not be an issue. Then you can be compassionate to yourself. Then the empathy.
I would just, if I may intervene, I have this discussion a lot about empathy, defining it, the compassion, the division, where they interact. Just for now, if it's okay that we don't go into that discussion, because I can see like a lot of minds going like, wait, I have my own definition, and that's true, and there's also a way that we're trying to base it upon sort of research and science. So just for now, is it okay if we pause that? It's a good question though, and I think one we can all ask ourselves about, where's that division between empathy and compassion? And for me, even the terms like distress tolerance, how you deal with your own emotion, are you aware of that? And to be empathizing with somebody, can you actually find a way to first realize the emotion that you're going through yourself? There's a lot of topics that come up there, so I realize your question, as beautiful as it is quite broad as well. So is that okay if we pause it for now? Yeah? Thanks. Last question?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for your talk. It was, like I said, really interesting and inspiring to me, actually. I want to ask a bit more about this compassion training idea of mindfulness, because what I've heard about this research by Tanya Singer, right, who mentioned that she did some recent research that there might be two different ways. Mindfulness in general might not really enforce compassion too much, but that if you focus on this compassion training in mindfulness, that might be a lot more effective. Do you know more about that? How that? Because I think, I read about it recently a talk by her, but is there, some new things on that?
Well, I don't know too much about it, but one thing that's important to mention in my talk is that I've grossly simplified everything. So I've just talked about meditation. The first study I showed that I did was meditation in the sense of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is some specific tradition. The other thing I was talking about was mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. It's actually quite a bit different because it's geared towards people with depression. So within the spectrum of, you could say, contemplative practices, there's quite a bit, and very often I just use the shorthand of mindfulness for all of these, which is grossly inaccurate. And clearly some of them cultivate compassion a bit more, others are much more on concentration and trying to really become aware of, say, where your breath is, and not so much opening up to the rest of the world. So I think that's where that comes in.
Thank you. A round of applause again for me.